Hello and welcome to Amnesty International and Fight for the Future's second Salon on Generative AI, as a part of our work opening the exploration of emerging tech to human rights activists. You can find all of our Salon recordings and info on upcoming events at emergingtechforactivists.com. I'm Leah Holland, Campaigns and Communications Director with Fight for the Future. I use they or she pronouns, and I'm based in the Pacific Northwestern US. Today, we're here to talk about an issue that's near and dear to our hearts at Fight for the Future. Since most of us aren't only activists, but also artists and creators. The tyrant fears the poet, right? And so we don't want a future where most humans work low-wage, uncreative jobs while machines use hateful or discriminatory algorithms to deliver art and culture. Recently, a letter from the Center for Artistic Inquiry called out Silicon Valley for betting against the wages of living, breathing artists through its investment in AI. It's also becoming the standout issue in the Writers Guild of America strike. Fake AI Drake has the RIAA clutching at its pearls and big content lobbyists clamoring for Congress to ban this or expand that. And at the same time, just like a drum plugin or a photo filter, artists are using generative AI as a tool to make beautiful work. And some techno-utopians dream of a world where generative AI frees us from a lot of the busy work of our lives, making more room for all of us to do what we want to do. Can we get from there to here? And how? I've really been looking forward to learning more from the artists and researchers on the cutting edge of this rapidly changing tech. So now I'll hand it off to Michael Kayvan, Director of the Silicon Valley Initiative at Amnesty International.
Thank you guys all so much for joining, and a tremendous thank you to our panelists for being here for this, what promises to be a really fascinating conversation today. These webinars really thrive on audience feedback and audience participation. So if you have any questions at any point, please add them using the Q&A function at the bottom. Leah and I will take note, and then during the Q&A, we'll make sure to the best of our ability that they get asked. And with that, it is my tremendous pleasure to introduce our panelists today. And our panelists include Walsh, who's the General Counsel for Creative Commons, Kayvan Ghaffari, who's the General Counsel for Maker's Place, Sasha Stiles, who's a poet, artist, and AI researcher, Jessica, an artist, and Jarid Scott, who's a digital artist, graphic designer, and photographer. And all of our panelists will be looking at the issues that Leah raised from slightly different perspectives, including AI in the commons, AI providing a platform for creators, how to use AI art to tell a story, and blurring the lines between creator, collector, and unlocking unknown skill sets. And so with that, I will pass it over to Kat to get started. And just so everyone knows, the order we'll go in, guys, is Kat, Kayvan, Sasha, Jessica, Jared. Kat, take it away.
Great, thank you. It's great to be here. And so I'm from Creative Commons, and we are an international nonprofit organization that empowers people to grow and sustain the thriving commons of shared knowledge and culture. People best know CC for our copyright licenses, but we're not solely a copyright-focused organization. And people have been coming to us with the question, so what are you going to do about AI? Our mission is not just about copyright, it's to reduce the legal barriers to sharing knowledge and creativity. So our focus is broader than that, and on policy that will enable a society where everyone is empowered to participate in, create, and learn from culture. And how we're going to do that with AI is a challenge that we've been facing, particularly in the recent months. So when people ask us, what are we going to do about AI? It's often hard to define the problem. Some of it comes from the assumption that our licenses have something to say about it. But the motivation behind asking is usually not a technical question around how copyright works. It's more of an expression about concern about what the future is going to mean for themselves as creators and learners, for people like them as an industry or a society, and for human creativity in general. Our licenses are a great tool for one problem affecting sharing online, that the default rules of copyright don't often match up with the ways that creators and reusers actually want to participate in sharing and seeing their work reused. But generative AI presents a different set of problems, and not all of those are ones that a tool designed around copyright law can solve. We take a minimalist position around copyright law, encouraging creators to think about which rights they need to keep and which they want to share, and encouraging limits on copyright, such as fair use, in order to enable culture to flourish. This includes limitations and exceptions, fair use in the US, with many other exceptions in other jurisdictions. And I'll say that we are a global organization, but I am a US lawyer, so most of the examples that I'm going to give and the things that I'm most qualified to talk about is going to be US law, and I will try to make acknowledgements where I know it differs in other jurisdictions. And generally, in the US in particular, we consider the kind of use for training AI to fall under those limitations and exceptions. That the right to study and learn from a creative work, either from a human or a machine, to get information from it and then use that information to create something new, shouldn't be something that a copyright holder gets to exclude. If we use copyright to block AI from making that use, would we also block humans from making the same kind of use? We've long taken the position that the right to read and learn from information is not something that should be limited to the creator. Once you've put something out into the culture, everyone should be able to study it and get that benefit. But in the context of AI in particular, to talk only about copyright would be too narrow a frame. Our position at CC is also that copyright isn't meant to solve every problem. Copyright is not a social safety net. Copyright is not community governance. Copyright is not an ethical framework. Copyright is just about making copies, and we're wary of trying to shoehorn it in to address those other gaps, which also affect the commons. And other solutions should come up in those places. Recommendations for best practices, codes of ethics, community governance documents, regulation, social policies. Extending copyright won't solve those problems and won't help us empower people to participate in, create, and learn from culture. But should we be participating in those other solutions, and what should they look like? We've been holding a series of conversations and workshops around AI, trying to figure out what it means for our community and what policy interventions we should propose. We've heard a lot of information and a lot of aspects of the question, both from creators and users, from entrepreneurs and public interest advocates, from people on all sides, but we have no easy answers. We do have a lot of exploration of the question, and we have a series of blog posts on our blog that have been exploring some of what we've learned and some of what we've thought. But generative AI both has great potential to empower and great potential for harm. It's impossible to talk about it fully and honestly without acknowledging those both sides. And we're excited about the potential for AI to enable new creation, to empower people to create by adding on to their own abilities, and to draw upon more knowledge and creativity than any human to help make people make connections that they wouldn't be able to make without that assistance, and even to grow the commons. AI is also helping scholars make connections in a variety of areas, helping with medical research, climate research, digital humanities, by taking in tremendous amounts of information and uncovering patterns that can support knowledge in the public interest. But at the same time, these tools should be used to empower creators, not undermine them, not betray their expectations. We know that many problems exist, among them that artists' livelihoods are already precarious, and the disruptive effect of AI might only make that worse. That the output of AI reflects the bias already existing in the world and can't overcome that, but can often even amplify it. That the way AI systems ingest and transform work is at odds with creators' intuition about giving credit and acknowledging the past, about figuring out where works came from. That works from these systems are missing both the context that they came from and any way to cite sources. So how do we get to a future where technology works for us and with us, not against us, and where we're in control of our own futures, rather than a few parties who have exclusive control of those technologies making those choices for us? Disruptive technologies have long enabled creation and sharing, even as they demanded social adaptation to deal with their effects, the printing press and the internet, among others. And generative AI has the potential to do the same. But we need to make the power of those technologies work for us. And how we do that is a work in progress, and one I look forward to discussing with you all today.
I believe it's my turn. Hi, everyone. Kayvan Ghaffari, General Counsel at Maker's Place. And hi, Kat. Nice to see you again. That was an incredible introduction. Maker's Place is an online digital arts marketplace. We're a premier arts marketplace. And we were the facilitator and for the Beeple's first 5,000 days sale that happened at Christie's 2 years ago for $69 million, and kind of like jump-started the NFT or digital art craze. At Maker's Place, we really believe in empowering creators all over the world. And I think one of the greatest aspects of the digital asset blockchain ecosystem is that anyone around the world can create art and sell art to a global audience without any gatekeepers, without any galleries being your representative. And it really enables individuals to enter the market in a pretty profound and robust way. At the risk of sounding cliche, I do believe that it is a decentralization of art in a pretty profound way. And it enables artists also to maintain and to receive royalties on secondary sales in perpetuity, something that the copyright law actually forbids and prohibits in the traditional art context. I think over the next few years, as the digital art ecosystem matures, we'll start to understand some of these rights in a more robust material way. And I'm really looking forward to that maturity of the space. With respect to generative AI, I echo some of the sentiments that Kat mentioned. It is a profoundly powerful tool, and it is profoundly powerful in that it can enable anyone to create art, at least in the artistic context, and that is what the scope of what I will be speaking about today as a general counsel of an art marketplace. And it really enables people to kind of be, imaginative and to enable them to interact with technology in a pretty profound way. But with every bit of new technology, there are worries, there are anxieties, and we have to be really respectful of the technology and take, considerable measures to have these sort of dialogues and discourses to understand the contours of what we're dealing with. But at the creator level, at the art marketplace level, we really believe in generative AI as a tool for creating artistic endeavors. We don't see it as a replacement of artists. We see it as just one mechanism by which an artist can actually create in a new medium. Just like the camera at the, in the 19th century, or the digital camera, decades ago. It is a new form of technology, a new form of artistic creation that people are starting to understand and respectfully, also reasonably struggle with. A lot of artists that I speak to, and I'm curious about the artists who will be speaking today, are concerned that AI will render them superfluous, while others are really encouraged by the technology and enables them to really expand their horizon, their creative horizon, in a new and robust way. One thing that we really are trying to lean in on is really, again, embracing artificial intelligence as a tool, like a paintbrush, like a camera, that enables people to really explore the inner bounds of their creativity and their imagination. I'm honored to be here today, and I look forward to speaking with everyone and answering questions regarding the creator tools that Maker's Place has in store. And as a general counsel, I do have some knowledge about legal issues in the United States with respect to copyright, and I will pass the mic.
We are having some issues with our captioning, which seem to have just gone a little rogue. So I'm trying to resolve that, but apologies to anyone. Apologies to everyone for that. And
AI tools, they're just telling us no.
Messages everywhere in the universe, anywhere you look. And with that, we'll pass it to Sasha.
Hi, thank you so much. Well, it's really great to be here. Really interesting to hear these intros, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this conversation today. Just maybe a bit of background and kind of some perspective on where my head is at these days when it comes to these topics. So as mentioned, earlier, I'm a poet as well as a visual artist, and I also am an independent AI researcher. I've been writing poetry my entire life, and I've been writing specifically about technology and really about the relationship between humans and our machines, humans and our digital devices. And these are areas and ideas that have just kind of preoccupied me for as long as I can remember. And, so for many years now, I've been writing mostly poetry, but also nonfiction and some fiction as well about especially speculative technologies, sort of thinking about how many of the advances in digital systems, how these advances that we are seeing around us, all day, every day, how they're impacting what it means to be human. A lot of the technologies that I'm very preoccupied with, like artificial intelligence, like questions of digital immortality, artificial reproduction, the list goes on and on and on, are variations on themes that poets have been really kind of grappling with and thinking about for thousands and thousands of years. Questions of what it means to be human, what it means to be born, thinking about mortality, spirituality. All these big questions really have a lot to do with themes that we're kind of starting to investigate through the lens of technologies like AI and like generative algorithms. So I've really, as a writer, I've been very fascinated by kind of bringing together my area of interest, which is really playing with words, playing with language, and thinking about how that intersects with much of what's in the offing when it comes to intelligent systems. And specifically, the area where I've really been weaving all this together is an area of AI called natural language processing, which in a nutshell, is kind of the foundation of ChatGPT and all these systems that have kind of blown up in the mainstream over the past 6 months or so. And I've been using large language models since about 2018 to co-author poetry, to co-author text, and to kind of investigate what it means to be an author, what it means to create language, what these systems do in a nutshell. And what I find so fascinating about them is that they basically exist to absorb tons of human speech, tons of human writing as data, and then sift through it, recognize patterns in it, and then use all that information to turn around and write like us. So there's a tremendous amount of knowledge to be gleaned from understanding what it takes to put these systems together, what it means to be a human interacting with the systems, what it means to automate a system that can actually write like a human. And these are things that, again, as a poet, as a wordsmith, as a text-based artist, I've just been completely fascinated by. My book, Technology, which came out in 2021, is actually co-authored with a generative AI tool customized on my own writing and reference material, which I think is something that we could maybe talk about a bit more today. Started using off-the-shelf tools way back when with GPT-2, I think was my first foray, but kind of quickly realized that there was a lot I could do, not only with taking that off-the-shelf tool and kind of tweaking parameters and all that, but if I actually went a step further and started training a model on my own writing, on my own references, on my own vocabulary and my own interests as a poet, and essentially create a custom AI-powered alter ego to tap as a co-author, how would that influence my writing process? How would that impact, concerns around publishing something that I was writing with this kind of a generative tool? So lots of sort of creative questions, as well as logistical, technical, technological, legal questions that I've been wading through, in this experiment, really, of creating and then working very, very intensively alongside an AI poet. So maybe I can leave it there for now. I guess lots more to say, but I'll pass the mic on and look forward to diving into more of the details as we go.
Sasha, thanks so much. Can't wait to hear more about what that experience was like. And Jessica, over to you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Salinas. I go by Wonder Mundo as my artist name. And a little background about me, I am what I would call a corporate world burnout. I spent like 20 years designing corporate content, working as a program manager, translating between the IT department and the business to understand what that was. And so I've always been in the middle of I guess, technology and the physical world. And I started doing digital art when I was a teenager, because I've always been an artist, but I can't draw. It's my thing. I'm not an illustrator. And when I found I think it was actually Paint Shop Pro. This ages me, back in the 90s. It's like Paint Shop Pro. And I was like, wow, I can actually draw with a mouse. I can do this. And it really changed my perspective, and it really drove my career at that age. And it really expanded my horizons, I guess, at that point. And so I really see AI now as an extension of that, to be able to tell my story in ways that I never could before. And I think AI is a powerful tool for that, where yes, originally there's this fear of, oh my gosh, it's going to take over, it's going to take over. But once you work through that fear, what, that comes up, you really are able to use the tools to create that story. And the way that I like to look at it too is everybody has a right to be a creator. Everyone should be able to do that. And just because you don't have the technical skill set doesn't really mean that you should be left out of that. Why are we gatekeeping who can be an artist and who can and do those things, right? And even accessibility. I have a friend who has muscular dystrophy, and she used to paint more with her mouth because she can't move any part of her body. Now she can text and type, and now she uses something like Midjourney and can create all these pieces. And so that really shifted my perspective of how I was thinking about, oh, AI is going to take my art, it's going to take my job, it's going to do these things, but really started looking at it as, how can I use this to tell my story, because I can't do it in the ways that I've always been able to. And so with AI, I think one of the things as an artist, the perspective that I'm coming with is that use it, I think, like you said earlier, as a paintbrush, right? It's not the end all be all, it's a tool. You can use text generators like Midjourney, things like that, and then add ChatGPT if you want to create that story. And I think the big thing about this too is you can take an active part in participation, because there's actively artists fighting against it. I think I saw that question too, fighting against the training. You're taking my art, right, and you're making art from it. But if you think about it, that's what we do as humans anyway. When I go to a museum and I'm looking at art, it's all inspiration, and that's going into my neural network in my brain, and it's doing the same thing. AI is just allowing us to do it in a more advanced way, more quicker way. And I also think that as an artist, you also have a responsibility to be able to shape those technologies as an active participant versus someone fighting actively against it. And so
Oh, Jessica, you are paused. You might want to try turning off your video and see if that makes a difference. And we'll give Jessica a few seconds to resolve this. If it doesn't unpause Jared, then we'll go to you. Let's see here. Okay, when Jessica unpauses, we will go back to Jessica after Jared for a minute or two. But Jared, we will pass it over to you. And just to echo Leah, those are excellent headphones.
Thank you very much. Hey everyone, my name is Jared Scott. I'm a digital artist and photographer. Been doing art in some capacity since 2007. I started kind of taking it very seriously in 2016. And I actually, for full disclosure, work at Maker's Place along with Kayvan. So I also work at a digital art marketplace. I'm also very big in the glitch art community. I've been helping run the Glitch Artist Collective since 2019, and kind of more on topic today, I've also been helping run the Midjourney Discord server for the past year. So I'm pretty close with the dev team that helped develop Midjourney. Some of the points that I want to make today are going to echo what Jessica was speaking about. One of my favorite parts about Midjourney is how empowering I found it to be as a creator in the space. And instead of holding me back and taking away my opportunity, it is giving me so many opportunities. Very similar to Jessica, I very early in my art career found out that I couldn't draw whatsoever, which kind of forced me into other lanes of creative expression. It's how I got into photography. Photography led to the darkroom led to photo editing led to glitch art. And that's kind of how I got to the path where I am today. Now, if AI had existed back when I first started, and I was super inspired by works like Salvador Dali and his surrealistic oil paintings that I felt I couldn't recreate, Midjourney is a tool today that can help people create any form of art genre that they wish, that they are not being held back by their own, lack of motor skills. And I'm seeing this really interesting happening in this new art world we find ourselves in, where the lines between collector and creator are blurring, all thanks to Midjourney. As Jessica mentioned, everyone's kind of creative, and tools such as AI are helping people who maybe before didn't feel like they could express themselves do it. Many of the big collectors who collect my work are now in turn creating their own works of art now because of this advent of AI and AI assisted art creation. Back when I first started as a glitch artist, I was kind of limited to photographs I took myself or stock photos and like lovely people who upload to sites to like unsplash and pixels with the Creative Commons license that allow use for commercial purpose. Now with the advent of AI, I'm no longer limited by a photograph I can take myself or a photograph that someone else took. Anything that I can imagine, the AI can help me create, and then I can use it as my source material that I add to my kind of Batman arsenal tool belt of art tools for creation. I don't feel like I'm being replaced as an artist. I feel like I'm being empowered and lifted up. I think change is big and scary. And I do think there are like very valid concerns and potential dangerous precedents being set by AI. But, just look back through history. Everyone thought that radio was going to kill newspapers and TV was going to kill radio and the internet was going to kill TV. And all of those mediums still exist. If there's one thing humans are, is we're adaptive. We find a way. I don't think AI is going to replace artists. I think artists are going to learn how to coexist with AI and use it for whatever they need to. Also, as Jessica mentioned, everyone's inspired by everything. Everything is a remix if you think about it. All art are just artists standing on shoulders of giants who are in turn standing on shoulders of even larger giants. And I think this AI is kind of just really shining a light on how influenced we are by, all of the beautiful art and culture that surrounds us. So, I don't think it's great that some of these AIs were kind of created by scraping other people's creations without their consent. I do think we could be more mindful about that going forward, but there's just so much awesome potential here. It kind of makes me sad that there's this horrible backlash about this thing that I'm finding so inspiring and empowering. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with this. And thank you for your time, everyone.
Jared, thanks so much. And Jessica, we'll go back to you for the last 2 minutes, and then we will start the Q&A. And a huge thank you to everyone who's been adding questions in the Q&A. We have a list of them here, so they will be asked.
Okay, sounds good. And I don't have much more to add. I'm not sure where I got my internet cut off, but just to add a little bit more, the last points I was going to talk about was being able to take responsibility into shaping the tool with AI. Like I think Jared said he was in the Midjourney Discord. There's tools where you can actively help train AI. Like, did you get the output that you're looking for? I'm first generation Mexican American, and I was playing around like, when I type in something like Mexican, what is it giving me? Is it giving me stuff that I know, or is it giving me stereotypical? And then you can actually help work through that. And so I think that that's what how you might want to think about it too, is empowering, so that if we don't help shape it, it's going to get shaped whether we like it or not by other people. And I think as an artist, you have the chance to be able to shape the future of where you might want it to go. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys so much for an absolutely fascinating conversation so far. And now for personally my favorite part of all of these, which is the Q&A. I'll pass it over to Leah for the first, and then Leah and I will alternate.
Great. Don't click on that Q&A that just got asked, Michael, because I'm actually going to start with that one. I love that one. Thanks for whoever asked it. So we have an Anon who's asking, for artists on the panel, do you feel with the advent of AI that your freedom of expression could be undermined in silent ways? By this, I mean that you are looking to a system to assist you to generate art rather than relying on your individual artistic talent. What do you make of this? Agree, disagree? And maybe we'll start with Jared, Jessica, Sasha.
Yeah. That's a fair point. I guess I'd start by pushing back on, like, I was more limited before than I am now. As I kind of mentioned in my little intro, I was super inspired by Salvador Dali as a kid, and I realized I couldn't draw or paint whatsoever. And so I kind of resigned myself to being like, oh, I'll never be a surrealist painter or make images that give that feeling that I get when I look at a Salvador Dali painting. And I kind of went down my own path, which I'm grateful for to an extent, because I think I found my own voice that way. But now today, I feel like I could revisit that myself into it more now through the power of AI. You're kind of, as an artist, already limited to what your skill set is anyway. When you sit down and you have this image in your head and you're like, I want to create this image for people to see. Well, I'm limited by my materials. Do I have paper? Do I have pencils? Do I have a camera? Do I have film for my camera? AI is just another one of these tools that I can now reach for to help bring this thing in my head out into the world. So I don't really see it as much different than being limited by the tools that I had before. I just see myself as having more tools now, if anything.
And on my end, I disagree. I think that it's undermining, because when you, for one, what is artistic talent? If I have the idea and the creative way to do it, just because I can't draw it doesn't mean I don't have that talent. I'm just finding a tool to do that. And I think that the way we might think about it is, using the tool is to execute on my idea. A lot of artists, for example, might have the technical skill set, but a lot of the famous artists are artists who tell a story, who sell their work, who know how to make it in a different way. And I think one of the things that AI art actually helps me with is, at least for my personal process, I'm actually not always typing into AI like, I want something to look this way. I usually am typing, I want to feel this way. And then I'm actually able to generate that art of how I want people to feel, if that makes sense. And so I think for me, it's actually expanded it a bit more and helped me in ways that I couldn't.
Yeah, I'll add, I agree with what's just been said. I think for me, I feel very strongly that AI has not undermined my creativity. It's done exactly the opposite. It's really kind of augmented my imagination in ways I'd never thought possible. I think, a lot of us tend to assume or sort of present creativity as something that has, no rules and no formal guidelines and all that. But I think that, especially for me as a poet, I think a lot about the programming and the algorithm and the guidelines that I follow, the things that I'm taught in workshops, the things that we've kind of grown up being told are the right way to write, grammar, syntax, alphabets, forms. All of these things are actually, like quite rigid rules that we are using in some way, whether or not we're actually writing in accordance with them or subverting them. And something that's really interesting about writing with AI for me has been kind of getting out of my own head and away from the rules that I've kind of absorbed over a lifetime of learning poetic technique. And I'm able to sort of take my own voice, put it to one side, and then kind of open up my writing style to the whole canon of literature and kind of see how I can take bits and pieces from this universal consciousness, this kind of universal body of authorship, and integrate it into my work. And so in a sense, I'm almost like deprogramming this very narrow idea that I have myself as an individual creator, as an individual poet, and I'm able to tap into something much bigger than that, which I think is tremendously exciting. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think, the power of these kinds of tools for me has always been being able to merge what I'm bringing to the equation as a human poet, as a human artist, bring that to the table, while also integrating the capabilities, the capacities of these intelligent systems. And we can both do extremely different things that can be quite complementary if we put them together in the right way. So again, to me, it doesn't feel like a replacement. It feels like an augmentation, or it feels like a synergy or a symbiosis where, I'm able to do the things, that a human poet can do. And I can do them, I think, fairly well because I've been training to do it my entire life. I have no interest in outsourcing any of that. But what I do have an interest in is using intelligent systems that are purpose-built to parse language and to create novel, fresh turns of phrase to be able to tap into that, bring that into the equation is just cracking open, not only my own practice, but I think, as we're beginning to see, it's really kind of unlocking new possibilities for writers in lots of different realms. So I think that's terribly exciting. And in some ways, but obviously AI is a very different tool than like a pencil or a typewriter or a computer, but also AI is a tool very much like those other tools in that they sort of become part of the fundamental materials that power authorial creativity. And you can say it's very different to write with a pencil and longhand than it is to type something on a typewriter, so on and so forth. Every technology that we use is going to have some sort of impact on the way that we are expressing ourselves. That's inevitable. But just because it's different, just because it's sort of evolving or innovating beyond what we might recognize right now, to me doesn't signal undermining. It signals change and transformation and new potential and new possibilities. And then the last thing I'll say is just I think a reference to something that I believe Jarid said earlier, which was, I wrote it down, I'm trying to find it, but Jarid, I think you said something like, anything you can imagine, AI can create. And I agree with that. And I also want to add that for me, a lot of this is that I want AI to also help me create what I can't imagine. And that, is a huge piece of the draw for me as an artist, but also I think for me, in terms of thinking about AI's applications more broadly, there is that possibility too, that this is enabling us to ideate and problem solve on a level, on a scale that we simply are not equipped to do as humans. And so again, it's hard for me to think about that as an undermining. It really feels like it's cracking open a lot of new potential.
I'm going to somewhat abuse my my position as a moderator to ask two questions. The first is asked with the imp of the perverse on my shoulder, whispering in my ear, which is Jarid, Jessica and Sasha, you guys have spoken about how useful these tools are and conceptually how we shouldn't see them as different than tools that have come before. First, I'm curious if there is anything about generative AI tools that does give you pause, that you do think is different in degree or in kind from tools that have come before. And then Kat and Kayvan, I'd love for you guys quickly to just dive into, from Makerspace and Creative Commons, what would you each say is the single thorniest issue around sort of ownership and copyright when you look at generative AI, and how are you guys trying to respond?
Yeah, I can jump in first there. I do think one of the things that kind of gave me pause, and this was, I think, more so an issue maybe about a year ago, but it was just kind of how similar a lot of the art that came out of these AI programs looked like. And, this was simply kind of due to just how infantile the technology was. Anyone who's been paying attention to Midjourney over the past year, you can see the huge leaps and bounds that it's kind of grown in just a year's time. But I think, as someone from the glitch art community as well, I feel like you kind of see this pattern a lot, especially in digital art communities where a new technology comes out that makes creation super easy and everyone kind of floods to it. And every time this happens,
Sorry,
you get
Jarid,
all this.
Jarid, but is there anything that gives you pause?
Sorry.
Question.
Let me give it. The thing that gives me pause is that kind of, I think what some people use the term soullessness when it comes to AI art, where anyone can just go in, type in a prompt and make a cool cyberpunk looking picture. The lack of kind of identity that can come from it due to the ease of creation. That is probably the thing that gives me the pause the most, is kind of like the lack of things that are boundary pushing and innovative.
For me, what gives me pause is just disinformation, being able to feel that a bit more with things like AI, and whether it's bad actors using it to create that disinformation, which we already have a problem with, or whether it's well-intentioned organizations. Like earlier this month, even Amnesty International got some heat for using an AI generated art. The intention was to protect the protesters, which totally understood, but perhaps maybe instead of using a photorealistic, might have used more of a painting style or artistic style, right? But that gives me pause, especially seeing the deep fake AIs and how that comes, where we haven't really educated, I think, the masses on how to really spot that. It's not something you learn in school, right? How do you spot disinformation? How do you tell that difference? And I think that's the big that gives me pause, and it's a macro problem, but I think that's the little scary part sometimes.
Yeah, and I would say I do think AI is a very different kind of tool than other tools. I mean, I often look back as much as I look forward in my practice, and I like to kind of draw a little bit of a through line between inventions like, the arrival of language or the invention of the printing press and things like that, and just kind of put AI in a little bit of a historical context. But I also think it's important to note how different and how game-changing AI is, even within the context of those kinds of paradigm shifting inventions. AI is a tool that potentially has the ability to be, to become autonomous and to do things on its own in a way that previous inventions can't and haven't. And that's, obviously something that is hugely laden with risks. So, that is a huge marker, of difference that I think we need to pay attention to. And a lot of that risk also comes from the fact that, there is this huge lack of transparency still in the way that a lot of these systems are built and how they're trained and actually how they work, right? Even people that are building these systems don't always understand exactly how the decisions that are coming out of these systems are being made. Just the way that, we understand very, very little about how our own human minds work and how the process of cognition works. We understand very little about how a lot of the decision making within intelligent systems happens. So that, has a lot of obviously very troubling manifestations and lots of different use cases for AI. So those are things I'm often quite concerned about, and that I do spend a lot of time thinking about and writing about as well. And like Jessica was saying, I think, this whole area of AI literacy, AI education is incredibly important. I think for someone like me who's been working with these tools for a long time in a very hands-on way, I understand a lot about when AI is hallucinating or when AI is lying. I understand where that's coming from and why an AI is coming up with something that isn't fact. It's not that AI is trying to pull the wool over our eyes or spread conspiracy theories. It's just the way that these systems work. They're basing their creation of statements or of ideas or images, they're basing it on a surplus of facts, and they come together in different ways that don't always represent reality. I know that very well because I've witnessed this and experienced it and utilized it in my writing over the years. Most people that are just starting to use these tools now don't really have that depth of knowledge, or that they don't have years of history of having seen the systems change. And so there's a big piece of understanding of how and why these outputs are what they are. So that's also incredibly troubling. And I think that's why I and so many of the artists that I know who are using AI feel it's important to be doing this, to kind of really get into the tools, use them, collaborate with them, but also collaborate with the technologists who are creating them, collaborate with others who are involved with shaping the tools, and really just getting involved in a more meaningful way in the creation and the understanding, in the public awareness of how they work. And one other thing, which is probably very obvious, but I'll say anyway, something that troubles me still to this day, though it's gotten better than when I started, is when I started years ago, especially coming from a literary background, I found myself in a lot of rooms where I was the only poet, the only creative person in a room full of coders or engineers or technologists. I also found myself as the only woman in a lot of rooms. And of course, there are a lot of biases, in tech. And I also do a lot of work in crypto and blockchain, as many of us do. So biases against, women and non-binary creatives, I think in this space is something that's quite troubling, and thinking about representations of biases in data sets is also incredibly troubling. And of course, again, there've been big strides over the years, but still a very, very long way to go. And that's another reason why I think it's really important that non-tech people, non-engineers, people that are coming from other walks of life with other backgrounds and who represent diverse points of view are also coming to the table and getting to work closely with these tools and have a say in what they're doing and how we're shaping them for the future.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And then real quick, Kayvan and Kat, what is the thorniest copyright issue that you guys are each seeing? And then I will shut up.
Kat, you want to start? I can do my quick.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say I think the thorniest issue that I've been seeing is around like people wanting credit for their work. One of the things we're concerned with at CC is like, why do artists create and why do artists share, and like what makes people want to share their work with others? And one of the main things that people choose CC license for and put their work out openly for is like, look, I want people to use it. I want people to share it. I want people to know the way that these AI systems work. People still want credit for their work, but the way that the systems work, and it's not just copying and pasting from what our artists have created. It's like, information is extracted, it gets turned into models, like in that there's so many layers of abstraction between like the input and the output that it's impossible to say like, oh, this part came from this artist, like this part came from the others. Like to give credit, you'd basically like have to give credit to the entire training set, and that's not very meaningful or satisfying. So is there anything that we can like explaining that to people like isn't very satisfying to people, especially when they can see like, oh, these aspects look a lot like my work, or these aspects look a lot like something else, even when they're the user of the tool and they want to give credit to the artists that they think it is inspired by. Like, we don't have a good mechanism to do that. And copyright as having like a single author is kind of an artificial invention to begin with. Like, every work came from such a variety of sources that it's impossible to, but there's such a, like, people want to follow the norms, like people want to give credit, people want to acknowledge where things came from, and they want to put that out in the world, and we don't have a good way to say how people can do that with these systems.
Yeah, I think I would echo, Kat's statements. I think lack of education is a theme amongst like the creators here, and talking about how people need to be more educated about the technology. I think people also need to be more educated about what copyright law is, right? They think of copyright law as like this one, very binary set of laws without understanding, how do courts actually grapple with questions of infringement and what is copyrightable and whatnot. And with respect to these, training models, as Kat mentioned, like, are we thinking about, are these training models like verbatim ingesting, analyzing like the image, or are they abstracting themes? Are they abstracting colors? Are they extracting patterns, right? And that abstraction is very similar to someone going to a library, sitting down with a book for 10 years of like Van Gogh or Picasso or Piet Mondrian, right? And then becoming a Cubist artist, or someone being inspired by Picasso or whatnot, right? And so I recognize, I sympathize with the desire for attribution, and I sympathize with the desire for compensation, right? We're getting back to this whole big tech taking rights, perceived rights from creators and not being able to pay them anything for it. But I do think there is an interesting dynamic in that copyright does have these sort of filtration tests that enables tools, enables others to abstract themes, because they don't allow you to just copyright a theme. Like, J.K. Rowling cannot copyright something about wizards, right? Like, you have to extract what Harry Potter is, and then she has a protection over that abstraction, right? Over whatever those contents are that are stripped from like just a boy wizard who goes to a wizarding school. And so I think this lack of education extends in the copyright realm as well, as to what is actually like the bounds of copyright law.
Great responses. And you could even go back to thinking about the boy wizard who goes to wizarding school in The Wizard of Earthsea, which predates Harry Potter, and many people kind of view as like a foundational piece of the remix that J.K. Rowling did to be so successful with her own story, which just comes to mind as a word geek myself. I think that first we're going to come up on time here. We have so many questions, and I'm commenting in the background. This one is so good. This one is so good. So can raise your hand if you could say like 15 more minutes, panelists, to answer a couple more. All right, we got two. We are all right. We got all of them. Great. Thank you so much. No pressure if anybody has to drop. So, oh my gosh, how do I even start? Jessica, we have a question for you specifically, following up on something that you said. You mentioned that utilizing AI to shape responses that are inclusive, instead of letting it shape it for us. Are you finding that biases are coming through with AI? And do you think that marginalized communities can actually help shape AI outputs and how AIs are trained? Or are we just going to end up pulling over a lot of the same biases from other technology or from data sets as before? How can marginalized creators make sure that their art isn't and their culture isn't getting lost amongst layers of generative AI? And also, after Jessica answers, anybody else feel free to chime in.
That's a great question. Yes, I do think you see biases coming over. I think that's inevitable. You got to remember that these were algorithms, whatever, are built by humans, and as humans, there's going to be biases. But I think that we do have an ability to shape. I'll give a couple examples. So I was part of OpenAI's early access program, and they specifically look for diverse individuals like women, non-binary, people of different ethnicities, in order to be able to flag things that were coming up. So I would go and type in, like, give me a Mexican desert, see what, if it gave me a sombrero only instead of the desert, I would flag it and give it the reason why. And so again, that's work. It's not easy, but I think that you have the opportunity to do it in that way. And same with ChatGPT. I think if as you start working through it, you can kind of give it information back and say, like, that's not wrong. And then it kind of learns. It's kind of interesting. I'm not fully 100% there yet with it, but I do think we have that ability to shape it. If you're a tech person, you can probably do a lot more than I could, if you can code and things like that, to be able to understand a bit more. But I think that if we at least have a voice and are aware that we're able to catch it, then, as opposed to now where we're not able to. But unfortunately, those biases do exist. And I think that, at least for me, that's what makes it important to, like, flag those things when I see it.
Yeah, I'd like to add on there, because I do think that's a very valid concern. I think we've seen very similar things where, back in the day, I think it was Twitter would crop out African American or African looking people from like photos, because that's something that the algorithm learned over years and years of racial bias, and also separate, but like the patriarchy and capitalism, all these big buzzwords. But I do think the opportunity here is how young this technology is. It is advancing very quickly, yes, but we're still in very early days. Like I mentioned, Midjourney launched just about a year ago, which means that unlike these other algorithms, which have been trained for years, and it's like going up against a giant and trying to deconstruct all of this horrible psyche that humans put into it, it's still adaptable right now and malleable. And like Jessica mentioned, now is the time where we can, try to change it and correct the course of everything. And I know we keep talking about Midjourney a lot, but that's just the one I'm closest to. But like, their staff is very receptive to feedback. Changes have already been implemented due to backlashes that happened a couple months ago. So I do think it's something we need to be mindful of, but I'm also very hopeful that, we could do something right this time, since we are in the very early days of it and it's not something that's so established and concrete already.
Yeah, I'll add quickly, I think I've seen time and time again over the years how artists and how creatives using these tools have actually had like a material impact on how the technologies are being shaped. And one example that comes to mind is my friend Trevor Paglin, who's an AI sort of specialist and artist who has been really inspiring to me. And he worked hand in hand with an AI expert named Kate Crawford on a project called ImageNet Roulette, which I think was in like 2019 or something. But it was a whole project, an art project built around the idea of exposing biases implicit in a massive image database, ImageNet. And it was a really provocative project that got a huge amount of eyeballs on it and really kind of raised people's awareness about the fact that there are all these implicit biases in data sets, but it also resulted in a lot of changes to the data set itself and to the categorization and labeling that goes into it. So I think, something like that is, I think, a really good example of the way that we can maybe sort of like, approach being an artist using these tools, being able to sort of understand that our interaction with them does actually have a lot to do with the way that they take form. And I would also say that, again, having worked with GPT and large language models for more than a few years now, I've seen them go through a lot of evolutions. I've seen a lot of improvements. I've also, of course, seen a lot of places where they still need to get better and better. But I mean, one specific example is there's a poem in my book, Technology, that is just, it's the same prompt, the same question asked over and over and over and over again. And I kind of waded through, hundreds of outputs in response to this prompt, this question. And this was done back in 2018, 2019, I think, with GPT-2. And I was floored by the range of responses, some of which were lovely and poetic, some of which were catastrophically, dystopian, some of which were pornographic, and some of which were incredibly racist and misogynistic. And it was just a really kind of an eye-opening experiment for me to see all of that coming out unfiltered in those early days. And of course, a lot of guardrails are going up and have gone up since then, but there's still a lot of work to do. And an example of that is been doing a lot of work lately with another sort of pioneer of generative language, Ross Goodwin, who we've been working on some sort of emergent AI poetic projects. And we'd really love to experiment even more with really kind of letting an autonomous poet take the reins and output more of its own text. But we still have to be so careful about making sure that certain ideas, certain words don't, escape the lips of this poet. There needs to be so much control and curation at this point in time. And it, again, is a real stark reminder of what's embedded in the training data set that really underpins all the tools that we're using.
Thanks, guys.
I want to jump.
Oh, no, after you, Kat.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this also. So interestingly, like I have a lot of history with the Wikipedia project also, and a lot of what I see with AI actually mirrors, I think, what I see with Wikipedia, in part because both of these projects are not creating new knowledge. They're largely synthesizing what has been done in the past. Wikipedia is not a primary source. It reflects like what has been already published in the world, as with these generative AI systems. And what Wikipedia found was that its view of human knowledge was reflecting the biases that existed in published knowledge in the world, which does not accurately reflect like a lot of the history and knowledge of people who have not had access to publishing in the past. And I think that's true with generative AI also. It's drawing on what's already been published from the people who've been able to put that out there, who's been able to get their works out there. And I think this like drives some of the some of what solutions should happen to address it. Like we need to be able to see what people are using as training sets and being able to curate that to like create a better picture of the world. Like that's if we have transparency into what it's being trained on, we can look and see whether it gives an accurate picture of the world or not. I'd love to see also people have more education about these AI systems and what they're actually doing, so that they don't think what is coming out is like an objective picture because it came from a computer, which seems very silly, but like it's hard to like shake that assumption if you haven't like had that question asked to you in the past. It also drives some of our policy recommendations, such as like, should we allow people to opt in and opt out? Like, should we mandate transparency, things like that? And some of that is like, when these options are available to people, how does that affect the bias and what comes out?
Thanks. I'm going to combine a few audience questions, and I'm going to ask all of our panelists, please try and limit your answers to 30 seconds to 60 seconds. We can hear from all of you and try and get through a bunch of these. There are 3 questions that point to various different potentially problematic aspects of using these tools. If you have using tools that are owned by for-profit entities, in what ways can that undermine one's artistic freedom? You know, can you be nudged or prodded in certain ways to select certain types of art or styles of art, not be aware of it? Similarly, Serena talked about her experience as a poet trying to get ChatGPT to write poetry in the style of Etheridge Knight or Gwendolyn Brooks, 2 popular Black poets, and it couldn't, though it could copy Shakespeare without a problem. And if it can't copy the style of 2 popular poets who have plenty of documentation online, then again, what kind of implicit biases within these systems might be nudging artists in ways that we might not even be aware of, and how can one respond? And then the third sort of critique that comes from the questions, and this is from Felix, is beyond the question of copyright. What is the future for artists insofar as a lot of what artists do can be automated, especially from an income generator? A lot of what artists do to generate income can be automated. And Felix says, it's difficult to imagine a world where art is a viable alternative as a job for most of us today. And it ties into the broader question of, you know, threats to different professions that come with these tools. And so the questions that I'd love you guys to respond to are, how do you respond to these critiques around implicit biases, about relying on for-profit systems, about the impact that this has on people's livelihoods?
I can start. I mean, I think they're valid concerns. They're concerns that we have, that I have even now, or have had in the past. And I don't know if I have a good answer or even an answer or solution besides being able to participate in it, in what's being shaped, because the threat of AI taking jobs is not just artists, right? You have lawyers, you have, it's beyond artists. So maybe start thinking of, how can I as an individual have a role in AI that will still have me do what I need to do, if that makes sense? Because I think they're valid concerns. And I don't know the answer as far as the algorithm and the training on that. I think that's a bigger question I'm not super qualified to answer, but I just want to validate that they're concerns that I think everybody's still thinking about. And I know for me, it's part of why I'm so much in the tools as well.
Yeah, I'll echo Jessica's comments. I think it's important to recognize like how nascent of an industry this is. It is still in its huge infancy, and we want to build foundations now such that as it scales, it can actually adapt to these questions and make sure that they actually have more inclusivity in the content. With respect to and as a result of that, I think participation from different communities is actually going to be integral and vital to that. With respect to the for-profit, it's an interesting question. These data sets require extensive amounts of storage, which costs a lot of money. And these technologies need to make money in order to do that, right? And so there's a difficult balance in how do we reconcile that. My personal opinion is that there should be it should be available to the public, everything. It should be a part of public infrastructure as opposed to for-profit. But even that has a huge significant cost associated with the storage and computation of the algorithms. And so it's an interesting question, one that I'm still, wrapping my head around intellectually. But even so, it's all about participation. It's all about identifying which platform speaks to you the best. I would encourage everyone to use all platforms, because I think having that constant training is important, but as it matures, we'll each have our own individual platform, just like a Canon versus a Nikon versus a Sony camera, right? All of those are good, but they have different quirks that photographers prefer.
Addressing the third question in particular about the fear of jobs being replaced by AI. And I can only speak for myself here. I know I'm a white cis male, so I've had opportunities that others have not. But speaking personally as an artist, kind of the two advents of NFTs and AI coming together have created an opportunity for me for the first time in life to make more money off of my art than I ever had before. And secondly, making art that I want to make. Before, I was kind of beholden to either like a band that hired me to make their album art, or I also worked as a graphic designer at a print shop, and I was constantly making, logos and business cards for other companies. Back then, someone said, hey, if I invented a robot that can come and make logos for you instead, you can go work on art that you want to make instead, do you want to do that? I would sign up in a heartbeat. So personally, I don't care if they replace that kind of soulless graphic design job. And that's no offense to anyone who enjoys doing that. That just wasn't my passion. So, from my own experience, I have no fear of that because it has only empowered me to make more money off of my art instead of taking away those opportunities from me.
I was going to jump in just with a quick response on the poetry question in particular. One of the reasons that I got involved in some independent AI research in the beginning was because I was looking at I was looking at examples of poetry projects that were using kind of the existing large language models, and they were all, sort of representing, canonical literature in the very kind of most typical sense, creating poems that sound like, 16th century or 17th century or Shakespeare or Emily Dickinson or whatever. And that's wonderful. And that, that's like a good place to start. But, I'm a really big fan of contemporary poetry as well. And I really didn't see any of that reflected whatsoever. And it's, just purely because there was really no contemporary poetry represented in a lot of the big data sets. There also, was a major focus on, white male writers. And, again, all the kind of systemic biases that we acknowledge and recognize that are present in so much of our lives, are present in these data sets as well. And so I really wanted to sort of understand more about that and get more involved in actually trying to integrate some of the poets that I read and that I love, into the mix. And so that was a big reason why I started working actually as a poetry mentor to a humanoid android named Bina48, who I have been working with since I think 2018 now, kind of looking at the places where her existing kind of canonical knowledge of poetry ends and where there is a gap that we can fill in with greater diversity and representation and inclusion. So that's been, both an eye-opening experience and also just kind of a reminder that a lot of this is about, recognizing the areas that where there are shortcomings, where there are problems, where there are things that we need to work on, and then kind of figuring out, how to bring the material that we want to into the equation. And I would also say that there's a particularly good AI-powered generative interface that I just wanted to recommend for any of the writers who are interested in this. It's called Sudowrite, Sudowrite, and it's actually a tool that is rooted in GPT-3 and I guess now GPT-4 or soon GPT-4. And it's purpose-built for writers. It was actually trained on a lot of contemporary literature, so it actually does know a lot of the the poets that the underlying models themselves don't necessarily understand, and that kind of also illustrates the importance and the possibilities of being able to take an off-the-shelf tool and then customize it, or sort of build your own and have it fueled by the existing tools, but customize it, personalize it, make it something that is useful for the things that you want it to do. I also just wanted to say super quickly, because it's come up a number of times, I love the references here to training data sets and then kind of the way that human minds absorb creativity. My kind of go-to reference for this is, of course, a poet. There's a really wonderful essay by T.S. Eliot called Tradition and the Individual Talent, which is all about how writers have to write as though they have all of the written record in their blood and in their bones. And that to me is just such a nice kind of analogy, such a nice metaphor for so much of what creative AI is about, which is about making all of these points of inspiration and information and creative expression sort of available in a sort of a universal brain. And I think, it's been true all throughout history. And what we're doing now with AI is sort of obviously an evolution of that, but it's a very human, very innate, very ancient impulse.
It's so great. It's some of what you're describing there feels very Wikipedian to me, in terms of the curation and aspect of AI and how you're collaborating with the technology.
I wanted to mention too, I totally forgot, sorry, but it was just interesting to hear that question about Gwendolyn Brooks in particular, because there's actually a poem in my book written by AI rooted in GPT-2 that is a direct reference to a very famous Gwendolyn Brooks poem. So I don't know if the person who asked the question is still here, but I thought that was an interesting call out. I'm curious, and I'm going to do some more digging on that.
Nice, yeah. So we're almost at time, and Kayvan had to drop. Sorry, no, somebody had to drop. Jessica had to drop. So I'm gonna turducken one last question. This is a lightning round. Everybody gets 30 seconds. Kat, you're gonna go first, and then Sasha, you're gonna go second, and then we're gonna do Jared, and then we're gonna do Kayvan. All right, so Nick asks about the labor conditions for low-wage outsourced workers used to train AI and accountability there. Morgan shared a story about Amazon deleting a review of a crappy AI-generated book with 600 fake reviews. And there's the issues Writers Guild of America are raising that Michael just asked about. Corporations, as Said mentioned, joining us from Morocco, extracting even more profit and making inequality under capitalism worse. How can artists and activists advocate for change and corporate accountability? What is, as Luis asks, the number one thing artists and activists can do to collaborate better to shape the future here? 30 seconds, lightning round, go.
Oh man, this is a hard one to answer, to go first answering. Like, this is one I think I'm gonna echo that like copyright is not a social safety net, like that we need actual social safety nets, that, all of that like the presence of AI doesn't change the need for that. It just disrupts a few more industries. So all of the labor issues that people are already fighting for, like that need becomes more intense. Yeah, I wish I had brilliant solutions for this, but I don't think that I do. Just that, like, I don't think that there's like, virtue in like the way that things currently are. I think that we need to be like, the more things get disrupted, the more we need to be open to new systems.
So work together for more social safety net infrastructure. That's a great one. Next.
I think I'm next. Well, I think for a while I sort of saw my work in AI and my work on the blockchain as sort of separate and maybe kind of related things, but I wasn't quite sure how they went together. And over the past 2 years or so, I've really started to understand more and more about the potential to kind of link them together, and really, use some of the technologies that we're now seeing proliferate via the blockchain, like, collaborative smart contracts, and being able to really empower communal authorship and things like that, tying that together with the kind of collective consciousness that AI unlocks, and being able to really start having meaningful logistical conversations about how to create universal creative income. I think there's something really interesting there that ties very closely in with my own like personal mission on the blockchain of trying to empower writers and poets via Web3, and also using tools like using technological tools like AI to sort of empower writers and help them, express themselves in new ways, but bringing all that together to really make it possible to make a living as a writer, as a poet, in a way that hasn't necessarily been possible. That to me feels important, and also kind of a good case study for how maybe like a universal basic income rooted in creativity can potentially begin to manifest itself.
Advocating for the value of art. It's one of the things I drew from that. That's awesome. Next.
To me, the three examples that were brought up don't sound like problems with AI. They sound like people using AI for bad reasons. And it sounds like a greater issue of capitalism exploiting people with this new technology than the technology's fault. So, I think AI artists and creatives are an easy group to come after. We kind of saw this with NFTs a few years ago. Instead of like focusing on bigger issues such as like the power consumption with blockchain tech, they were attacking artists that were using it. And it feels like easy. It feels like an easy way to kind of like feel like you're like making change over something you see that's bad. And I think we can use that human aspect to help improve in these areas. Having talks like this, having transparent conversations about the intent of this technology, and recognizing that humans do have a capacity for bad, and they can use things for bad, and they can use it for good. And like we need to understand that this isn't really an issue with AI, it's an issue of capitalism and human intent. And then recognizing that, making the changes now in the early stages of this tech to have a greater impact in the future and kind of set it on a course that can lead to good and not bad.
Dismantle capitalism. Cool. Ben?
Yes, please.
You know, I'll preface my answer with something that the Icelandic singer Björk said in like 1997 about electronic music and criticisms of electronic music, that it wasn't music at all. And she said, don't blame the technology if it doesn't have soul. Blame the person using that technology for not imparting soul into that music. And I believe that, you know, it echoes kind of what Jared was saying. The technology is always being used, like it is technology is neutral by itself, right? It is how people use it that is actually creating the outputs that is actually being used in artistic endeavors or whatnot. And AI has been around for a long time. Photoshop is AI. Microsoft Excel is AI. We're just looking at a new iteration of it, a very powerful one, no doubt. But the tool itself is just a tool, right? And so I think because of that, I'm just going to echo what everyone mentioned, like working together to form a safety net, working together to collaborate and educate are going to be really critical as this ecosystem matures and as we see this really, you know, young new form of AI grow.
Everyone.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to listen back to this conversation like 6 times. I'm so grateful to you all for joining us and going over. We'll go ahead and just wrap here. This recording of this conversation is going to go up at emergingtechforactivists.com. Thank you everyone for joining us and have a really great rest of your day.
Thank you guys so much.
Well,
Thanks so much.
Everyone.
Thank you.